Welcome to Doc NYC's Q&A for the film Wojnarowicz. My name is Basil Siokos, and I'm the Director of Programming for Doc NYC. I'm happy to have with me Chris McKim, who's the director of the film. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're so very thrilled to be able to show this film at Doc NYC. David Wojnarowicz died more than 25 years ago at just the age of 37 in 1992. And surprisingly, and I could be wrong, but I don't think there have been many film projects focused on him. There was postcards that was made from his work, but that was quite soon after his death. When did you first become aware of his work, and what motivated you to take on his story for this documentary?
I mean, I would have first become aware of him in college, but it really wasn't until 2017 when this project started to take life. And I was actually trying to figure out what I was going to do next, and I was kind of researching archival projects that I thought would be archival projects from this, maybe set in the 70s and 80s, and stumbled across David again, and it was exactly that thing. I realized there hadn't been a documentary about him. It was about a year before, they had scheduled the Whitney retrospective that was coming up, and there was all this story. So I had reached out to PPOW, which, quick research told me it had been his, last gallery, and it turned out they managed the estate. And then things kind of very quickly took off from there.
And was it a challenge to get access to his archives, or was that fairly straightforward once they understood, your background and how you were approaching the project?
It was pretty straightforward and easy. I know they've been contacted since we started the project, people interested in making a documentary about David, I think following the retrospective, but to that point, they understood that, they knew David, they knew what was in the archive. His partner was the head of the estate, Tom Rothenbart. And so, they really knew, they had spent all these years trying to keep the spirit alive and keep David's, name in the news, and they had been championing the retrospective. So once things got started, they were really easy, and his archive was all at Fales library at NYU. So, it was really kind of, lots to go through, but it was all right there, including his audio tapes, which they gave me, cassettes or access to, and his contact sheets, everything. So it was really great.
And can you talk a little bit more about sort of going through that archive and sort of finding just the hidden gems that were there? You said earlier that you were looking for an archival project. So having that, the wealth of this archive must have been sort of just a treasure for you. Can you just talk a little bit about sort of how you went through it, the length it took, and sort of the things that popped out for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, we started with the audio. There's, I'll get the number wrong, but probably more than 50 cassettes they have in the archive, which is, his tape journals, mixtapes, messages that he would send, when he was staying in Paris, he'd send tapes to friends and had a copy. So it really started with that, because they had sent me files of that stuff. And so very early in the project, I just loaded them onto my iPhone, and I would sit at the Avid and I'd pull selects and stuff, but I would, on hikes, when I would go back to New York, because I'm in Los Angeles, I'd go back to New York, whether it was to do interviews or to go through the archive and stuff, I'd walk around the city and listen to them. So it all started with the audio. Much of it from David, some of it, like I said, might be mixtapes or band rehearsals or, him hanging out with friends, whatever it would be. And I just put it on shuffle. I had sort of no sort of preordained way to go through it. I just wanted to kind of take it all in. And so kind of build it from there. At the archive, I spent, over several trips, 3 or 4 weeks, I think, there, requesting folders and getting them, not knowing what might be in them, and just I probably have half the archive on my phone still, because I would just sit there and take photographs of stuff. And we ended up using that, a lot of that for the film as well. And then certain things like his contact sheets and whatever, they would give us high-res images of his contact sheets. So we had maybe over 10,000 images, I think, because there were over 500 contact sheets. And, little gems would, stories of nights out, whatever it might be, might stand out. But then it was the connections, whether it was a direct link to a photograph or, a scrap of paper that seemed like, oh, this connects, or it could help tell or illustrate that story. And so it all just kind of came from that.
I mean, I love the archival approach, certainly, and I love, you know, having so much of David's voice in the film. Obviously, makes the audience feel very connected to him, and you really get a sense of not only his, you know, I think people talk about his rage and his sort of the outrage around sort of, you know, the AIDS epidemic and the inactivity of the government, et cetera, but also just, you know, those connections that he has with friends and loved ones comes through in such a clear way. So, so kudos to kind of going with that and kind of making it almost entirely an archival film up to close to the end. And I do want to actually, you know, so you did reference the Whitney show. So just to be clear, you knew that the Whitney show was coming up and you knew what it was going to be about, or was it just a happenstance that it kind of lined up perfectly for you to end
well,
the show?
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it was, I first reached out to PPOW a full year before the retrospective. So we knew it was coming, and I think it had actually taken them, my understanding once I got involved was that like it had been delayed a few times over the years. So I actually got quite lucky. It had like, you know, happened when it was supposed to. Somebody else would have made this film 2 years ago. And so we knew, you know, we knew the opening was coming up, and that was actually, I think, the second shoot. I had gone and done an interview with Tom Rofenbart, his partner, early on, because Tom wasn't well at the time, and we were still trying to suss things out and get funding and such. But when the retrospective opened up, we sort of went to the opening, and you know, we went with Tom and Wendy and Penny from PVOW and Anita Vitale, who's head of the foundation now, who knew David, and sort of got them taking in the exhibit.
And that's such a moving scene. I mean, it is, I mean, on a level, of course, for filmmaking, it's a perfect ending to the scene, but it's also an emotional sort of way to wrap things up with Tom being able to see that work. And so I think that's, you know, I think most audiences members are going to be really struck by that. What was it like for Tom, who is, as you said, kind of keeping David's work alive for such a long time, but what was it like to sort of have the space of this documentary to kind of have that ability to reflect and really go into a deep dive for a project like this about David and about the influence of his work on his own life?
I mean, Tom was not out of the art world. So, you know, in terms of the work and everything, they were memories, you know, walking through the show. It's, you know, and this is true of so much of David's work and so many of David's collaborators and people that knew him. You know, they see a piece of art and they're like, oh, we were there when we took that picture, because it's all, you know, whether it's the collage work or, you know, elements that he would reuse over and over again, you know, they could see themselves in the work. And, you know, with Tom, I think they were just excited to have the opportunity to tell the story, because, you know, there was, you know, whatever he died in 92. So over 25 years of, you know, trying to keep doing reprints of the books and everything, and really trying to get him out there. And I think just even the having the retrospective finally open was a very cathartic thing, because, you know, they wanted to do right by David. And of course, Tom passed while we were doing the documentary, so he, you know, he will not get to see it. But you know, making it, I was always worried that David would come back and haunt me. So that was kind of our, you know, our kind of guiding line. So I think trying to keep David happy. I think if David doesn't come back and get anyone, Tom will be happy.
Well, on that level, that kind of leads to my other question, which is that David was such a hard to classify artist because he did so much and he combined so many different kinds of elements to his work, from painting and film to music and writing. The film does a fantastic job of kind of covering that, but was it difficult for you to include everything you wanted to include? I mean, there's only a limited amount of space that you have. So, you know, I guess what were the darlings that you weren't able to include that you would have loved to, or do you feel pretty overall happy with how much you did?
In terms of the artwork that we included,
Yeah,
everything. You know, I think David's work is hard to, you know, you do have to look at it, and a lot of it is involved in some of the bigger collage pieces. It's like on a glance, you know, floating through a film. It's really hard to take in, and I think that kind of goes back to having David's audio, because we could approach it from his point of view, whatever we were talking about, then the art could come out of that instead of trying, you know, as a filmmaker, to process it and then get it in there. I mean, there are lots of things there. I mean, you know, stories from David that I would like would have loved to have included. I mean, he, you know, lived more life in a moment than most people do in their entire lives. And he had so many collaborators and people whose lives he touched while he was here, you know, and worked with and stuff. And, I think more than some of the David stuff, I feel bad that, we aren't able to make it quite the celebration of everyone that came through his life, but having so much of him in the film kind of it kind of took some of that pressure off through the course of it. But, at the same time, you want to give everyone their space and, their piece of who he became and what the legacy is.
And speaking of that legacy, you're in some ways, you've said it yourself, this is more than 25 years after his passing. So this film is for many people, I'm sure, reintroducing or introducing David's legacy to a whole new generation. You worked at this project with Fenton and Randy from World of Wonder, who you've had a long relationship with. They obviously brought a lot of increased queer visibility to modern, to the mainstream, to the TV work, which I know you've been part of as well. But they've also done Mapplethorpe in a few years back, which again is another queer icon of the art world. Can you talk a little bit about working with them and sort of how you're hoping to really celebrate David's legacy and kind of introduce him to this sort of younger generation of queer people that may not really know about him?
Yeah. Well, in terms of Randy and Fenton, after I had the discussion with PPOW and reached out, I, spoke with Fenton, and they were on board from the beginning. And as you said, I've worked with them on and off over the years since like 2001. The first thing I did was filming behind the scenes on the scripted Party Monster. So we go way back, and and I was there on Drag Race for the first 4 years as showrunner. So there's an incredible shorthand and trust. They've both given me all the opportunities, but then have sort of trusted me to succeed and fail along the way, which has been incredible. I don't no one else I think would have sort of stood up and funded this film the way they did and have championed it. And in terms of David, I think it's interesting because we locked it back in February. We were racing to finish it in mid-March with the mix and everything as the world was shutting down. But that spirit, David's spirit, and everything he railed against, I think is very much on display and has been on display in the last 6 months. For better or worse. And I think, people have said that I've met people that knew David is like, whenever you need Wojnarowicz, he's there. And the fact is that, in sort of telling his story and framing it through his fights and sort of his rallying cry and call to arms, I think was the best way to kind of remember him and both meet him and remember him and introduce him to a new generation. Because I think that spirit of art is resistance and putting yourself into your work to make a difference, and the one tribe nation and all of the things that he said, I think are so important. And I think now when people are so frustrated, it's the people running the show, David kind of left behind a handbook of how to approach that, both cathartically and as a means of protest.
That's excellent. That was going to be my question, is sort of, how would he respond to this present moment? And I should note for viewers that we're recording this prior to the election, so who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's October 6th. We could all be dead tomorrow. Well, it's I would never put, try to put words in David's mouth, but, I think he, when you look at what he said about the politicians of his day and, wanting to douse Jesse Helms in gasoline and light his putrid ass on fire, I think you could turn that into a Mad Lib, and how David would feel about any one of these people, whether it's Mitch McConnell or Donald Trump. And we saw how he felt about the Mnuchins. So, I think he would be at the front line of all the battles.
Well, I want to thank you for bringing this vital film out into the world. I was really excited to be able to include it in Doc NYC. And we do have to wrap up, but I want to thank you so much, Chris, for joining us for this Q&A and for bringing Wojnarowicz to the Doc NYC audience. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you so much.